Welcome to another edition of the Corner Booth Podcast from the Stoughton Delicatessen. I'm Aaron Rand from CJD, along with Bill Brownstein of the Montreal Gazette, and our special guest today, Montreal City Councillor Sterling Downey. Welcome.
Thank you.
This is not your first time at the Stoughton Del, I'm guessing.
Not my first time at the Stoughton Del.
Yay.
I was able to identify, by the way, every dish set out on the table. That in and of itself is impressive. Look, we're here to talk about a couple of things, but I want to start with the thing that's, of course, the most important. I know this is something you've been working towards for many, many years, and that's Canadian veterans. It's the 80th anniversary of D-Day this week. You continue to work hard for the cause, and I know it hasn't been easy because obviously every year that goes by, we're losing more and more of our veterans. People tend to forget. As I said, it's been 80 years, so maybe that's not as big a surprise. But you're working very hard, and let's talk about one thing, and I know Bill wrote about this, and that's the National Field of Honor in the West Island. That's the biggest cemetery of its kind for Canadian veterans, and funding is now going to turn out to be an issue.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. As you can imagine, something that's the size of the Field of Honor, because we have over 20,000 veterans.
22,000.
22,000, yeah, so that's it, who are buried there. This is a large property, and maintaining your front yard is a problem. So imagine maintaining a property of this size and this scope. It takes an enormous amount of money and maintenance, and the problem that the Field of Honor has had over the years is they rely on volunteers and people coming in to help and do that, but it's almost impossible to do something of that size just based on volunteers. So now the Field of Honor is making a push to get Veterans Affairs Canada to get involved and to take over ownership of the cemetery and actually contribute some funds towards the maintenance. It's a national heritage site. It's a very important site considering the people who are resting there, what they sacrificed in order for us to have the liberties and freedoms that we have today. Therefore, they deserve nothing but our respect. My uncle's actually been buried there, so it touches me in that way as well.
And you were there for the ceremony, as I was, as Dave was, for D-Day and all the rest. But what's incredibly difficult to understand is Veterans Affairs assumes the costs for two other military cemeteries, smaller one in Nova Scotia, one in BC, and at present it's the last post of a non-profit group that's been funding the cemetery, but the way things are going, they're going to run out of money in a couple of years, and everybody's pushing for Veterans Affairs to take over it. So you would figure Veterans Affairs would be a little more, would be sympathetic to this and try to do something.
Well, it makes sense too, because if Veterans Affairs was to contribute to the maintenance of the property and to sustaining the property, then the Last Post Fund could focus on helping veterans' families in terms of burials and in terms of funerals and other things, and contribute in another way. I sit on the board of directors for the Quebec Veterans Foundation, along with a number of other people who have served in the military and important people, and we help manage St. Anne's Hospital, the veterans wing of St. Anne's Hospital, the 2 floors. So this is an issue that's important. And Aaron, you said something that's really important. We talk about our veterans, and we talk about most of them are not alive anymore, and we're losing them. But I want to correct something, and not out of disrespect. This is the way I was brought up too. My father was a Second World War veteran. My uncle was a Second World War veteran. They're no longer here with us today because they would be 100 years old or older. The problem is we have current contemporary veterans. We have veterans constantly alive, and we have veterans from conflicts like Bosnia, Cyprus, Afghanistan, and all this. These are still our veterans. The problem is our generation, which is fine. We were brought up to respect our parents and our grandparents for their service, but we've forgotten about the young men and women serving their country today and who have sacrificed their lives and their families for what they're doing. And we have to remember that the Field of Honor and places like this are also places for them for the future, and they're going to need it. And it's something that we're really working hard, I think, to re-educate people to say that when my father came back from the Second World War, he was 22 years old. He was a kid. He went in at 15, 16. They all lied about their age. So back then it was normal that every 22-year-old or any 25-year-old or 30-year-old, you knew that they were a veteran. You knew they served, pretty much. Today we've forgotten that young people are serving members in the Canadian Armed Forces or in the regular forces, and that's something that we have to work on changing, because those wars that happened, and that great generation, are not the last that will serve, and there's going to be continued people serving.
You know what? I would ask you to that point, and I'm glad you brought it up. This idea of generations. Yes, you're right. We grew up to respect those people. The Second World War, in the First World War, if that's when you were alive. Why do you think now And I believe the military actually in this country is having a difficult time recruiting people to serve. Why do you think that is?
Well, recruitment and retention is very difficult because, again, the Army is a young person's game, right? Like, I mean, you try to recruit younger people to get involved. This is why you have programs geared towards paying 50% of your schooling, different things like that, and summer job opportunities and training opportunities. So it's really geared towards students and people that are in school, struggling, can't afford to go to school. It's to create opportunities. And one of the problems with retention is once young people get through school and then they have to get a job and they want to start a family, it's very difficult for them to balance their civilian jobs along with their military careers in the reserves or anything, even if it's part-time. So I work closely with the CLFC, which is the Centre de Liaison des Forces Canadiennes, and they work with employers to develop leave policies, military and reservist leave policies with companies to make sure that reservists who are serving, who are also employed, like Via Rail and other companies who are very popular for doing this, and the city just did one, is to allow these reservists to go on training operations, or if they need to deploy, to go. And it's the government that pays their salaries, not the employer at that point. Their salaries are frozen, they go. But it's important that we encourage that kind of service. And the reason why I say this and I advocate for it is because we've seen this. So our generation saw this with the ice storm. The cities and municipalities weren't able to deal with that catastrophe when it happened. So the military came in to clear roads, to restore power, restore communications. They were brought in because it was an aid to civil powers. We saw it with the flooding in the West Island where we have it. We see it now with the forest fires. We saw it on the front lines of the pandemic. Don't forget, it was the Canadian Armed Forces that went into the long-term care facilities to take care of people. They're the ones who wrote the report that led to a change in these long-term care facilities, saying that there was a major problem. It was the military that did that. So we have to remember that it's extremely important to have well-trained, competent individuals who can serve, and we have to do everything we can to encourage them to stay in service while being able to adapt to their civilian life and their civilian work. I'm really proud to say that literally 2 weeks ago, downtown, the Régiment de Maisonneuve had their Freedom of the City March, and at that Freedom of the City March, they gave the city and me a certificate recognizing us for the fight that I brought forward to have the city of Montreal adopt a military leave policy for our reservists, for our employees of the city, because a lot of our firefighters are also reservists in the reserves. A lot of our police officers are reservists in the reserves. And we have other employees in general, STM bus drivers, engineers.
That's a policy that didn't exist up until now?
It did not exist.
You know what's interesting, Craig, is Sterling.
Craig, I love Craig.
We love Craig.
Shout out to Craig Sauvé.
Shout out to Craig Sauvé,
who happens to be a very good friend of Sterling, who got him into politics.
Who got me into politics,
and we were talking about him previously. What's interesting is that there are so few politicians advocating for veterans, especially younger politicians like yourself. I don't know of hardly anyone, certainly on the city level, provincial level, and all the rest. Why is that?
I don't know. Again, maybe it's a connection, like I said, and like I was saying before, maybe I consider myself very lucky in a way. It's rare that somebody of my age, again, 51, which I'm not young, but I'm also not old. My father was a Second World War veteran. He served the whole duration of the war. So he had me when he was 51 years old. Most people that I talk to that are my age, it was their grandfather that served. So it's a generation removed, and they didn't necessarily get the stories straight up. I saw the impacts that my father's service had on him. I also have the values that he tried to instill in me at a young age that, it was very hard because I was very rebellious. Obviously, a 55-year-old man or a 65-year-old man trying to tell a 15-year-old kid not to hang out in a park because he was on the ocean in the Battle of the Atlantic at 15 or 16, and I want to hang out and drink with my friends in the park. There was a generational clash, but those stories and those values are still instilled in me. They were still put there. I have them today. And I think that that's what it is. I think that people just don't have that proximity. They don't see the impacts of it. And on a municipal level, I try to remind people that, we talk about the Canadian Armed Forces, and those are our veterans as well, but our first line responders, our firefighters and our police officers are also veterans. They have a job that is an exceptional job where they put their life on the line and in danger. They come back with things that nobody else sees on a daily basis at work, horrible things. They're at the lowest points in some people's lives and at some of the saddest moments in people's lives, and they're constantly there to serve. And I think it's a shame because if we were closer with that, we would understand the values of service. If you go into the US, you go anywhere in other parts of even Canada, if you're wearing a firefighter shirt, or if a veteran walks into a building, or whatever it is, somebody's paying for their coffee. Somebody is going up to them and saying, "Thank you for your service." It's this notion of you give respect to the person who is there to defend you or to protect you and your family. Here, we just see people as if they're blue-collar workers or just employees. We don't, and it's a huge problem. But I think it's slowly changing, and people like me have to advocate and speak up about it. And
But
You're describing what sounds like a Quebec-centric problem. You're saying go other places, you will see this sort of thing.
Well,
why here specifically?
I mean, so, and I think this is very important to say, and I want to be very clear on this. There are enormous, the Canadian Armed Forces in Quebec is primarily made up of Francophones. So Francophone serving is today, and even back in the day, my father used to talk to me about this all the time. There were Francophones just as much as there were Anglophones across the board serving their country and serving and fighting for the liberation of Europe, and continue to this day to serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. For some reason, there seems to be still a lot of scars from First World War, Second World War, where some people didn't want to go, and they were forced to go, and then this is something that their family has carried as a burden for a long time. And what I always try to tell people is, I understand that with conscription and all the things that happened, and it definitely wasn't fair back in the day with the British Army and the troops, and certainly I'm sure Canadians, before Canada was Canada, I'm sure Canadian soldiers, whether they were English or French, were sent to the front lines before maybe some British soldiers. War is not fair, and lots of things happen. But for me, anyone who died on the battlefield, or anyone who died in battle, or even civilians who died, everyone who lost their life deserves our respect. It doesn't matter how they got there. It doesn't matter what happened to them. They are not with us. They deserve our respect, and we deserve to remember them, because by doing that, we try not to repeat what happened in the past. If we forget about them and we forget about that service, then we repeat the same mistake.
The Corner Booth podcast is brought to you in part by the Snowden Delicatessen, where we are. 75 years in business, the hub of Montreal's greatest smoked meat, plus Carnotzel, potato latkes, and the famous Snowden Deli party sandwiches. That's the Snowden Delicatessen.
Sterling, you're doing more than advocating. You're also, as we talked about, trying to enlist on a certain level. What's been going on there?
So I've been working with the military for a very long period of time, probably about 10 years now that I've been actively engaged since I've been in politics. And it's something that is important to me. And, being as close as I am to the military, again, I'm a member of the Royal Canadian Legion, I'm a member of the Black Watch Veterans Association, the Quebec Veterans Foundation, et cetera, et cetera. At a certain point, when you're around all of these people and you come from a family that served, my nephew's currently in service as a reservist in the infantry and the Black Watch. At a certain point, I'm like, what did I not do? My father, my uncle served, everyone served. I understand that politics and municipal politics is service. I mean, people in the military tell me all the time, you are serving in a different way, and you are serving your community. And it's respected as a form of service, but it doesn't feel like enough. So when I work with these men and these women, and I try to advocate for them, and I try to do things, I grew up with the idea of, walk a mile in someone's shoes before you say something. And sometimes it takes me a while to get around to that moment in my life. But since I was about 42 years old, I said, you know what, I should enlist. I didn't have the discipline when I was a kid. Didn't think I could do it, but now maybe I should do it and try. So recently in January, I enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces in the reserves in the infantry, and I selected.
As a 51-year-old?
As a 51-year-old, yeah, I enlisted. So I went through all of the aptitude tests I passed. I went through the force test, which is the military fitness test. I went through all of the process, the application process, the interview process, got it all done, passed all of that. Then I got to the medical phase of it, which I have to do extra medical because of my age. Went to my doctor, private clinics, got all my paperwork, submitted that, and currently I've been, for the moment, refused for something medical that I'm not aware of. I'm waiting for the letter to come in, and then I'm going to contest it because I'm top shape, and my doctor even said that I'm fine.
Hold on, I'm confused. I thought there would be an age limit with respect to wanting to enlist. We talked about this being something for younger men. What was their reaction when you showed up and said, you know what, I want to enlist. I'm 51 and it's okay, I don't care.
So what's funny is a lot of the members of the Canadian Armed Forces in and around Montreal know me because I'm present at all of these things and at their regiments. So the recruiting officer who actually interviewed me was like, Mr. Downey, he was kind of questioning like what I was doing there, and he's like, "Oh, you're coming in, you want to be an officer?" And I'm like, "No, I can't be an officer." And he's like, "Why can't you be an officer?"
Because you're
I'm
not
like,
a gentleman?
no, well, that as well. I'm definitely not Richard Gere. I'm more of a Craig Sauvé than a Richard Gere. But the problem was I only have a high school education. And to be an officer, you have to have a university degree. So I said, no, I'm going in as a basic member of the ranks infantry. And he was like, why? And I'm like, because I feel that I have the need to do this. So the cutoff age is around 54, because the retirement is 60. So you have the Canadian Armed Forces, in order to invest the couple of $100,000 it takes to train one infantry soldier, they want to at least have 4 years of service from you, minimum.
Okay.
So you have to enlist and get in and qualify, do your basic training, and then do your military qualification course before to be able to serve 4 years. So the goal for me was, if I get in at 51, get on my basic training this winter, then at least I can serve until I'm 60 years old, and then I can ask for an extension, worst case scenario, to 63. And then at least I could get 10 years of service.
Wait, I want to understand something else. Let's say you go through this entire process, they accept you, whatever this medical issue is,
Yep.
it gets, overturned, whatever.
Yep.
Could you actually be deployed?
If I volunteer. So there's two ways.
But you would be a reservist? Or
I would be a reservist, yeah, because I'm staying as an elected
Right.
official. I intend to continue because I need to keep advocating for this, because nobody else will, right? So it's a way of putting my money where my mouth is and actually doing something and trying to go as far as I can in the process and actually accomplishing it. So what would happen is, as a reservist, I would be serving basically one night a week and one weekend a month. That's what is the minimum required from a reservist to give back to the unit and to the reserves, and any other time that I have. So it's just like sitting on any board of directors that I sit on currently. I sit on tons of them, so it's just swapping one thing out to do this. And if I volunteer to deploy, then I could be selected for deployment, or I could be deployed. I could be, what's the word I'm looking for? I could be forced to deploy if Canada goes to war.
Right.
If Canada ever is invaded or goes to war, then all reservists are called up into the regular
As a
forces.
50-something-year-old, that's theoretically something that could happen.
So yes, so and I appreciate you saying that, Aaron, and I'm going to tell you why I appreciate it. So another community that I'm very close with is the Ukrainian community of Montreal. And
they're taking recruits at any age.
so this is it. So when the war broke out, when the Ukraine was invaded by Russia, I'm a part of I'm involved in a lot of colorful different organizations, and one of the organizations I'm involved in is called Bearded Villains. It's a group, a fraternity of bearded men around the world, about 500,000 members, doing a lot of charitable work and different kinds of fundraising. It's people who've had colorful pasts and difficult pasts, and they try to give back and do something positive with their experience. And in the Ukraine, we have a chapter of Bearded Villains. And what was interesting is, as soon as the war broke out, a lot of these guys, all of a sudden on their social media feeds, I saw them all of a sudden in fatigues and carrying weapons, because they had to defend their families and their country. And unfortunately, we lost some of those people in our group because they were killed in action. So as I was following more closely how it was evolving in the Ukraine, I was looking at men who were 50, 60 years old, and even older, who were patrolling their neighborhoods, who were helping. I mean, the Second World War, the resistance. We saw children, we saw adults, we saw older people working. When the time comes, if you're able to serve, you find a way to serve, and you find a way to give back. So, I mean, again, how many people came through? My grandfather was in World War I, survived World War I, and then when World War II rolled around, he re-enlisted and he went to World War II. How many World War II veterans came out of World War II after that? It was an atrocity, and then enlisted for Korea. So, at a certain point, we have to look at ourselves and say, today's 50 is not my father's 50. I'm in shape. I'm running 12 kilometers. I'm training for this. I'm doing all of this stuff. It's a different world. I'm probably in better shape now than I was when I was 35. So everybody can do it if you put your mind to it. And this is the other problem with retention and recruitment. Someone like myself, I truly believe at my age, with my life experience, can go into the forces. I'll be training and doing basic training with 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds. But I can bring something to the table in terms of leadership and in terms of mentorship, and help work with these younger people to help them find their strengths and all that, because even different levels of the officers and different people in different ranks need to have the lower ranks working with them. Leadership can be found anywhere in an organization. It's not just found by the people who are directing. It can also come from the employees, and it can come from the lower levels in the staff. So if I can find a way to contribute, I want to contribute. And again, if it doesn't work out, at least I know I tried, and at least I know that it was sincere, and it wasn't like, I'm not doing this as a political thing or anything, and I think people know it's sincere. I wouldn't be training and running 3 days a week or doing the stuff I'm doing if this was for a photograph.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it's important to me to put my money where my mouth is, and I said I was going to do it, and I have to follow through with it.
Your colleagues at City Hall, what do they think of this?
They
The mayor.
the same questions. Well, I think they respect and appreciate what I'm doing. I mean, I don't see it any differently. Like, I mean, one of my colleagues, the mayor of Rosemont-Petit-Patrie in the last mandate, François Creteau, a very smart guy. I like him a lot. He was doing his PhD while he was the mayor. So I mean, tons of my colleagues do other things at the same time. They're in school, or they're doing other things professionally. Some people have other jobs. Whatever it is, this is just it's a job. It's a job above other jobs. It's a different type of service. But it's no different than going to school at night or doing something else. So for me, it's just another activity and a responsibility that I have if I can do it.
I would ask you, just in reference to what we were talking about before, and you brought up something really interesting, and I don't think it's something we can expound on too much, but this idea of respect and what one generation sort of thought about people in the military, what this generation thinks about right now. I don't think we're going to be able to discuss why you think young people today don't find it as important for them to get involved militarily, but I'm wondering, just on a bigger scale, do you worry about the future of the Canadian Armed Forces?
Yeah, I definitely worry about the future of the Canadian Armed Forces, because it's a complicated machine, right? And I mean, understandably so. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, in terms of Canada as a country that does more peacekeeping and more diplomacy, the question is, why would you have an active trained military force? Because we're not going to war anytime soon. That's the I think part of the notion is people don't want to see investments in this stuff because they don't see the need, because we're not fighting active wars. But there's an imminent threat of these things happening at any point. But more importantly than an imminent threat of armed and engaged conflict, and this is what I drive home as much as possible, and it's what I said earlier, is with climate change. The reality of this with climate change, which is, I don't care who says it doesn't exist. We see it. Our winters are shorter. Our summers are longer. They're hotter. We see this. I mean, you can't even go skating on an ice rink out in the winter anymore because the temperature changes so rapidly now. It's not like when we were kids. The snowbanks are, like, I don't see kids making forts in snowbanks anymore and having snowball fights because there's no snow. So with climate change, you're going to have the need to find water or lack of water. You're going to have storms. You're going to have tornadoes. You're going to have power outages, you're going to have ice storms, you're going to have all of these things happening more and more. You're going to have natural disasters. Canada is not immune to that. And at that point, when these major atrocities happen, or we're faced with them, or my son's generation is faced with them, or future generations, who is going to be equipped to mobilize, have the equipment, the resources, and the training to protect their neighbors, their citizens, within their own borders, if not the Canadian Armed Forces? So I think we have to change our perception also of what the armed forces do and what their roles
Is
are.
that the Canadian Armed Forces' responsibility to begin changing that perception?
I think so, and I think they are. They're trying to, and I think again, like, I mean, if you're in the Royal Canadian Navy, for example, I'm also very close with the Navy because my father was Navy. We're talking about immigration, so we're talking about protecting people that are fleeing countries, that are coming in on boats that are in horrible situations that could be drowning. We're talking about drug trafficking, human trafficking. You're talking about, when we talk about the theft of cars. Well, who do you think is going to intercept a ship on the ocean if it's got cars in it? It's going to be the Navy that's going to come with the Coast Guard or the U.S. military or something. They're going to come. They have to intervene. So they're doing a lot more than just they're policing for fisheries, for people who are fishing outside of the territories that they're allowed to fish. those are just some examples of what the Navy
You're
does.
explaining this, though, and I wonder if it should be up to the military to be able to do that same sort of thing, to get that message across. This is not simply a matter of you getting a gun and going to fight somewhere.
Well, yeah, and I think that's exactly what it is. And I mean, part of it is the military, or the people that I've been engaged with have spent a lot of time teaching me. So I'm trying to spread the word out there too. And we have organizations like the Respect Forum as well, which is a great group that works with veterans and different organizations helping people in the military that are currently serving or that have left the military. Like, there's so much going on, but we have to do it. And I have to say, like, in light of what we were talking about, we're on the cusp of the anniversary of the invasion of Normandy. I mean, I still remember watching Saving Private Ryan. And me and my father had a very complicated relationship. I was a very horrible teen with him, and I said a lot of nasty things, and I didn't respect his service when I was younger the way I do now that he's gone. And I remember watching the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan in the theater, and I started crying. And it's still a little emotional for me now, but one of the reasons that it impacted me so much is I realized that these men, I mean, when those doors went down, I mean, that was it. There was no guarantee that you weren't getting hit with a bullet. And on my street where I grew up, I've lived there for 51 years, my whole life, and there was a gentleman who lived down the street from me because my neighborhood, Crawford Park, was all veterans. And there was a man called, his name was Bill Ludlow. Bill Ludlow was just this man on my street who was a veteran who I knew had served and whatever. I didn't really know much about him. His son actually gave me my first skateboard, which is funny because skateboarding is a big part of my life. And in 2014, the year after I was elected, I was asked by the family if I could go to St. Anne's Hospital and pin the Croix de la Légion d'honneur that France was giving to all veterans who were involved in the landing in Normandy. And Bill Ludlow was a minesweeper. He went onto the beaches to sweep for mines and all that. And this was a man who I grew up with down the street, an old man who, whatever, I knew some of his family. I didn't know really much about his history. And this kid who grew up as his neighbor, this little boy, was able to give this man and award him a medal from France for his involvement. So in a way, that was my way of doing something in my father's memory as well, because these are men that served with my father, and it was an interesting way of doing things. But I think it's those things that are important, and that's why talking about these things today is even more important than ever. Yeah. And I think about my friends who have served in, people who have served in Afghanistan, who have lost limbs or have been whatever, who are para-athletes now, or all of these different things. These are people that are younger than me that have sacrificed everything, that have come back with post-traumatic stress disorder. They've lost limbs. They've seen things that nobody else has seen. They can barely talk about it. So they're the same as my father. They're the same person as my father. They're a contemporary version of him, and we have to focus on that. But when we see these people, we see that's the bank teller. Yeah. That's the person who's at the university. We don't see them because we don't see them in their uniforms.
And they rarely talk about their...
They do not talk, and they do not ask for any recognition for what they do, and it's not their responsibility to do that. It's our responsibility to know that they are amongst us and to seek them out, and when we identify them, to thank them. To thank them and to thank their families as well for the sacrifices that their families have made. And I say it all the time about firefighters or anything. Anytime I give a speech at a service where we give medals to firefighters or we bring in new firefighters to the service, I always take a moment to thank their families and to remind them that they need their families at home, and their families are the ones who give them the power to do this. Because when your husband or your father or your mother or whoever, if they're in service, leaves at night for a 24-hour shift, and then you see on the news a massive fire in a building, then they're not, 9/11. 9/11 is a perfect example, and that for me is like another version of a D-Day, which is there are people who ran into a building, ran up flights of stairs, knowing that there was no possible way in hell that they could get back down in time, but if they could save one person or get one person out of that building, then they saved one life, and they walked in without any notion, and those families who that day said goodbye to their fathers or to their husbands or to their wives, that was it. That was the last time. And these people, in my eyes, are absolute heroes in all lines of service like this and deserve our complete recognition.
So the message, because we have to wrap up, the message, I guess, on this anniversary of D-Day, for people watching this is, let's acknowledge these people, let's show them the respect they deserve, because it's something we should never forget.
Absolutely. And again, we can have our polarized opinions on war. Nobody, I don't know. I've never met a soldier or an infantry soldier or anyone serving or who has served or has been deployed. I've even spoken with Romeo Dallaire on numerous occasions at events. I do not know anyone who has ever glorified the war or armed conflict. I don't know anyone who is proud of having to raise arms against another human being. And I don't know anyone who is gung-ho about going and firing guns. It's about service, and it takes people who are willing to make those sacrifices. And that was one of the things in my interview process, and maybe we can end on that, but my interview process was, one of the questions was, do you understand and are you aware that as an infantry soldier, your primary weapon, obviously tool is a weapon. It's what you're trained to use accordingly if necessary. And there may come a time in your life where you'll be forced to raise it and use it against another human being. Are you capable of and are willing to do that? And I had to think about it for a second, and my response was, my father had no choice. He didn't go into the Navy thinking he was going to see active duty, or not as much. They all hoped that they would get into a branch that would be less. But the minute that the first round was fired or the first torpedo was launched from a U-boat, there was no, you have to do what you have to do. No, but nobody, and my father used to tell me, I have pictures of them taking German prisoners onto the corvettes and things like that. Everybody's a soldier, everybody's fighting for what they're told to fight for, what they believe in, but nobody glorifies it, and nobody wants to see their kids or anyone die or civilians die. So, what we see going on in the Middle East right now and everywhere around the world, the Ukraine and other countries, none of this is okay, because we need to preserve human life, and there's got to be ways to deliberate, negotiate, discuss. There's treaties, there's ways to do things. Unfortunately, there are factions in the world, there are individuals, leaders who don't want that, and it's a dangerous time, and I'll say this very cautiously, but when I see people using language or, I guess, constructing conversation around very specific issues, religion, language, culture, identity, you name it, we've seen this before in history. We've seen this conversation happen, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous whether it's happening in the US, whether it's happening in Canada, or it's happening anywhere. It's dangerous. History has proven that people who do this mobilize and activate extremists and people who have ulterior motives. It gives them a reason, it gives them a right, and it gives them a pedestal, a voice. And then what happens is you have horrible things that happen. As leaders, we have responsibilities for the things that come out of our mouths and how it impacts our communities and our society. And we have to think bigger and longer term and bigger picture than just what's gonna get votes. What's going to, it's great that people like, the former US president likes the attention, but when the attention's not good attention and it's dangerous, then it's not attention that you should be craving or asking for. So anyways, on that, we have a responsibility to be a lot more intelligent.
And that's where we will leave it. Sterling, thank you so much for coming by. We appreciate it. Best of luck to you, by the way.
Thank you.
That's going to wrap up this edition of the Corner Booth Podcast. We'll see you again soon.